So why don't we get started here? Here's the title of my talk, and I wanted to really build on the work that we've been doing in this past year and to help give us a roadmap for where we're going or where we hope to go, okay? And so, this slide here really begins to capture what we are seeing in this country. And it's just, it's not just about business as usual. It's really a call to this country, to this nation, to all of us, to dismantle and address institutional and systemic racism, right? And that is what we're seeing, to uproot and rethink how we reimagine our institutions, the values and assumptions that guide how we work. And more importantly, and absolutely the most important, how we treat and how we affirm each other and how we allow each other to be our authentic selves in this space. And this is really what we're talking about, right? And so it's a systemic thing. And one of the things that I hear a lot is this notion is like, we got to fix the system. We got to fix the system, right? People talk about that. We've got to fix the system. And I want to kind of flip that on the script a little bit. And I saw a talk with the filmmaker, Ava DuVernay. Gosh, must have been back in September or August or so. And one of the things that she had said there really resonates with me in my ears, and I want to share it with you all. And it's the notion that the system is working exactly the way it's intended to be, right? And I think that's an important thing to really recognize, that the system is working exactly the way it's supposed to be and that it's not broken. And I want to really hold us accountable and look at higher education as a system and really follow through on Ms. DuVernay's premise here. And I want to take you through and share with you something that I do in my classes. And so some of you may recall in my prior life, right, I used to head up the college counseling program in the Department of Counseling. And I prepared counselors to work in higher education. And so a lot of my students and former students are advisors, they're counselors throughout, community colleges, this university, as well as all around. And one of the things I like to do when I teach them is get them to understand the context in which they're teaching, right? And so what I'm about to show is one of the first classes and one of the first mini lectures that I give to my students in talking about the system of higher education, okay? So I'm going to give you a real quick history lesson of higher education. And some of you may know this and others may be less familiar. And so this is a historical timeline of higher education, all right? And most scholars really anchor higher education in the United States with the founding of Harvard. And I want to go through some of these timelines. And as I go through these timelines, I'm going to ask you, okay, I'm going to ask you to take a mental note. And here's what I want you to really mark in your head. Given this timeline, given these milestones in higher education, when would you be allowed to access higher education? Okay, when would you be allowed to access higher education, given this timeline? So I'm going to go through it. 1636 was the founding of Harvard. At that time, it was predominantly an institution for upper class, white, landed men who had property, okay? If that fits for how you see yourself and how you identify, this would be when you would get in. In 1821 was Troy Seminary. And this was the first seminary that was for women. And it was giving access predominantly to upper class white women. Cheney College in Pennsylvania was identified as the first HBCU. And predominantly, this was giving access to Black folks and generally upper class Black folks. The 1944 GI Bill was the first time federal aid was enacted by the government, and that allowed people beyond upper class to actually get access to higher education. But the GI Bill was entirely directed only at the military. But that was the first opening of the socioeconomic door within higher education. Then Brown versus the Board of Education. But it wasn't until 1965 with the Higher Education Act and the expansion of federal aid to all segments of the country, right? Not just the military. And so we were breaking the socioeconomic status barriers and giving access to people from all socioeconomic stratus, not just the military, as in the GI Bill, okay? And for those of you who are interested, that was also when the Pell Grant and the TRIO programs were founded in the 1965 Act. And then it brings us to 2021. Okay, so again, make a mental note. And so let's take a look at what this means. Let's take a look at what this means. From Harvard to now, we're talking a time span of 385 years. Harvard to now is 385 years. It took 185 years till Troy before higher education was given to women, but largely white women, largely upper class. It took 201 years to give higher education to African American folks. It took 308 years to give access to middle and low income individuals to higher education. But again, the focus here was on the military, right? And it took 329 years before we were giving broader access to people across race, across gender, and finally socioeconomic status, right? 329 years. So I want us to anchor on that last, next to the last bullet point, 329 years, right? For 329 years of its 385. In other words, 85% of the time that higher education has been in existence, higher education has largely been one acting as a gatekeeper. It's been one that has been blocking exclusion to upward mobility. It has been one that has been used to maintain the status quo. And that only in the recent 56 years has this concept of higher education being a right, being something that is accessible to all of us, that is something that we should all have. That's new. That's relatively new. Because for 85% of the time that higher education has been in existence, it has existed as a gatekeeper, right? Even the CSU was only created in 1960 with the Donahoe Act, right? So this notion of us as, fixing a system that's broken, it's not broken. It's been working the exact same way it's been working for 329 years, right? So I want to punctuate this again, this point. If the history of higher education was a class that was compressed into a 3-hour time frame, a 3-hour time frame that started at 9 o'clock, right? Most of us, the vast majority of us, would have been allowed into that class at 11:33. Let me say that again. If we compress the the history of higher education into a 3-hour class, most of us would have been allowed only in the last half hour or less, right? And so this notion, again, of higher education as something widely accessible, that's new, right? And this slide really, for me, captures just how fragile, how precious the sense of equity has been in higher education, right? So you can't fix a system that isn't broken. You can't fix a system that isn't broken. This is a feature of higher education. So what we are trying, what I want to do and what I am arguing that we need to do is not to fix a broken system. What I'm arguing for us to do is to reimagine and recreate and co-construct this college and this environment. It's not just to fix it around the edges. We need to go deeper. We need to think broader, and we need to think together, right? It's not broken, it's a feature, and we need to question the assumptions upon which it is built. So my hope today is to share with you, the framework of some of what we've been thinking within the Race Collective, the values and process that guide our work, and some of our initial ideas, right? And we have been growing on these ideas. This is the race initiative that I talked about in my opening talk this year. And these are some of the goals and wishes for the race initiative. Many of you have already seen this, so I won't go into this in too much depth, right? But the key assumptions here are that reflection and action are really needed. RACE stands for reflection and action to create equity. And that we need an understanding, we need places to think, we need places to dream, we need places to learn before action is actually going to be effective and productive, right? And so reflection and action combined create racial justice. I've talked about this as a practice. This is not something any of us have done on an ongoing basis, right? This is something that we will all be struggling with. And so I think about this as a process. I think about this as a practice. And like a practice, it means we try, we take some risks, we fail. And as I have said already before in many spaces, that also means we get up and we keep moving. So this is really about creating and positioning us as an organization willing to learn, willing to unlearn, and willing to learn new assumptions and new ways of doing, right? And I think there's no better place to have a learning organization than within a college. The other point here that I want to kind of hammer in on is that this really, for me, the Race Collective and the initiative we were doing is really challenging the notion that, diversity alone is not racial justice. It is a piece of it. But as you can see in my later slides, we are going far beyond simply bringing people of color onto this campus. It is clear to me that that does not work. And we need to do more than just diversify who we are and who sits at the table. This also then for us really begins to really take a look at the ways we have all internalized white supremacy and the toxicity of that culture in all that we do. And so this really means looking under the hood and taking a look at how we do things and to what extent are we elevating certain ways of being over others. And so this must be systemic as the next to the last bullet point. We're looking at us as an institution. And as you can see, this is a long-term process. To undo what we have learned, to reimagine what we could be is going to take years and will probably take certainly the rest of my career to bring us to that next step. But I want to share with you then the framework that has been evolving and developing over time. And this is the race framework that the Race Collective, and you'll meet some of them in the talk shortly. And I want to honor them, take a moment here. And the Race Collective is the leadership team that is helping to co-construct this. And that's Sherria Taylor, JC Gonzalez, Brandon Venerable, Rebecca Toporek, and Tatiana Madison, right? And so this is the team that's been meeting pretty much every couple weeks since last fall to begin to really flesh out this particular framework. And the first place we've done is really focus on healing. But you can see that we really believe that racial justice is going to come from each of these circles. And I want to kind of flesh out some of these circles just to give you a feel for where we're at. Healing circles are a place for connection, support, dialogue. They're an emotional space. They're an affirmative space, right? They're a space for us to exchange and a place for us to be authentic. And it's striking to me that we have focused on these circles first, because what we have essentially done is really affirm the realities and the pains that a lot of people feel around race. And that before we do any work about the future, we also need to kind of acknowledge where we are presently. I am really super proud that we have launched our healing circles. It has taken a long time. We've created 5 healing circles. There's a little over 30 people who have engaged in those healing circles, faculty, staff, and some students. We've developed a website for them, and I'll show you this website in a second. And let me switch over here and to my screen. Hold on. And I will show you. Right here is the Healing Circles website. And you can see here, there's a little background on the Healing Circles, but we have developed a toolkit, a Healing Circle participant guide that talks through about what Healing Circles are, provides an initial curriculum for the first couple of days in terms of how to set it up and how to launch it. So this was developed by the team. Okay. Some groups wanted a unstructured experience. In other words, there was nothing already preset. There was no particular curriculum. And so those circles will kind of evolve as they evolve. Other healing circles wanted a little bit more structure. And so we've guided them towards the Racial Healing Handbook by Dr. Annelise Singh. And these slides here really talk about how to use the Racial Healing Handbook to structure their discussions and experiences in the circle. And then lastly, we've also developed a set of mental health and wellness resources, both in the university and outside the university, in case people would like to see more professional support or community-based support. Right. So one of the things I would like to say here, and then let me switch back again to my slide here, is that we've taken, I think, a pretty innovative step in creating a space for people to talk informally and as peers around this. A number of you have taken a risk and stepped forward. What I would also say is that these healing circles are going to be an ongoing feature of this college. And we will be creating and recreating different healing circles over time. Some people decided not to continue. They were looking for a different kind of circles. That's fine. These opportunities for this kind of engagement is going to be an ongoing feature of the college. And it's designed to help us normalize our ability to talk about race and racism and our roles in it. So don't worry about it if you're not in a circle now. We will be doing this on an ongoing space. This is the safety net that allows us to walk on the tightrope and do the hard work. But this is very much the safety net that we have underneath us. The next space here is that it's also clear to us that we need learning circles, places where we need to learn about ourselves and the experiences of others. Now, I was in a meeting the other day, and one of our colleagues, and we were talking about doing these trainings for MPPs and stuff, and one of our colleagues there was like, I don't want to sit in another meeting for 3 hours to learn about my biases. Like, I want to get stuff done, right? I want to get stuff done. I don't want to go through some training. And quite honestly, I get that. I get that reaction. I've seen that reaction, as a trainer myself. I've seen that in the room, and I get that. And personally, I wouldn't want to go through a 3-hour training myself. But the reason I wouldn't want to go through a 3-hour training is because there's no 3-hour training that is meaningful or substantive enough to even begin to capture the 500 years of history, right, of race and racism in this country, beginning with indigenous communities. It's not going to happen in 3 hours. And how that has been a thread in this country for this entire time. 3 hours won't do it justice, right? And one of the things I would say is we need to think thoughtfully about how to provide multiple and ongoing training opportunities. I think we need to take a stance where we all recognize that we all have something to learn. When I teach a class on cross-cultural, multicultural stuff, when I walk into the room, one of the dynamics that happens is that they see me as a brown man, and they think, it's the expectation sometimes in the room is that now white students will need to do the learning, and people of color can just sit back and they don't have anything to learn. That dynamic is toxic in any learning space. My personal belief in what I do in my classroom is that we all have something to learn, and we all have something to share. We're all different, but we all have something to learn, and we all have something to share. I can share my experiences of oppression as a person of color, as an immigrant. I know those well. I have reflected deeply on that. But I'm still learning, and I'm still continuing to unpack the prejudice I was raised in against Black folks, against Native folks, against lots of folks. I'm still learning and trying to unpack my own privilege that I have in terms of my gender, my sexual orientation, my physical abilities, my religion, my education, etc. Right? And so we all have something to learn. But one of the things that I would really put out there is that it is important for us to learn about ourselves and how we contribute, how we perpetuate, how we and our histories and our socialization makes this an even harder problem to unravel. So for me, these learning circles are really a place to reflect about oneself as well as learn about others. And the point I want to make here is that you can't fix something if you don't understand what the problem is. And so back to my colleague who didn't want to sit in a room full of and learn about her biases. What worries me about that is then what is her understanding of the problem? And what is her understanding of her role in that problem? And the failure to see that is a problem. Lastly, working circles. You can see here a whole scope of different things here, and this is where we change. This is where we really work with our institution. This is where we change our policies, our practices, our norms, our procedures, our assumptions, and even our culture, right? And this is where we can really begin to embed and institutionalize racial justice, right? And this is where we clean house. This is dismantling racism at its roots and really recreating the institution so that racial justice is at its center. The Race Collective and I have just begun talking about working circles and what that looks like and how to get people's input and ideas for where we need to start. We can't do all of this at once, but some things certainly really pop out as being more important than others. I will tell you right now, my personal feeling, one of the things that I am most heavily interested in is looking at our RTP guidelines for our tenure track faculty and thinking about how we can look at our RTP guidelines through the lens of race and gender, sexual orientation, identity, et cetera, and thinking about how we can infuse social justice in all aspects of the tenure and promotion process, right? That's one thing in my head. But how we do these working circles, we're still laying the groundwork for that. There's not just, as you can see with all the things in here, there's not just going to be one working circle. There's going to be many, and these circles are going to be long lasting. So in closing, and just to wrap up, I want to bring forward a quote by a woman that I've been reading a lot, Grace Lee Boggs, who is a lifelong activist in Detroit. That was her home. I think she passed away at the age of 101. And I have been looking for comfort and guidance from my elders. And this was a woman who continued to be an activist till her dying days. And I wanted to know how she did that. And this was a quote: "To make a revolution, people must not only struggle against existing institutions. In order to transform the world, they must also change and transform themselves." And you know, what I'm talking about is institutional change. And one of the most frightening things about talking about institutional change or institutional racism or systemic racism is that it gets big. It gets big very quickly. And it comes to overwhelm us as if it's this mystical, amorphous entity that's larger than us. And what I want to say to the college today is, it's not larger than us. It is us. It's people. Institutions like the college get their power from people. Institutions don't exist independent of them. They're not this floating entity. It's people. It's us. This is our college, right? We on this call are the College of Health and Social Sciences. The chairs make this college. The staff make this college. The administrators make this college. The faculty make this college. And the students, most fundamentally, make up this college. And because we make this institution, I wholeheartedly believe that we are exactly and precisely the ones who can reimagine and recreate this institution with social justice and racial justice at its center. So with that, I just want to thank you. It's just so weird just talking to a screen. I hate that about these talks, but I just appreciate your time to hear me out. And I will turn it over now to Sherria, who is going to introduce our panel. And Sherria, for those of you who don't know, well, let's just start off. Sherria is wonderful. So let's start there. Let's not go into titles and research and all that stuff. And she's a wonderful, energetic, fierce colleague who has held us as an institution accountable, who holds her students accountable, and like so many of us, tries to make all of us better. And she does that profoundly well. And I just want to thank you to her for taking the time to facilitate this. Sherria has been, as I said earlier, one of the members of the Race Collective. And I will tell you, she holds me accountable. That's for damn sure. So it's like, she doesn't miss a beat. But Sherria, I'm going to turn it over to you and all you.
Thank you, Alvin. I just want to say welcome, everyone, and thank you. And thank you all for the love, all the Zoom love. I love it. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. It really means a lot, especially today, talking about what we're about to dive into. Before I get started, though, I generally in all my classes I greet my students with this saying. It's a Zulu saying, and it's simply "Sawubona," and then the reply is "Sakona," and the meaning by with "Sawubona" is "I see you." Right? And it's more than just politeness. It carries the importance of recognizing the worth and dignity of all of us. It says, I see the whole of you, your experiences, your passions, your pain, your strengths and weaknesses, and your future. You are valuable to me. And it also carries with it and is infused with this belief that until others see me, I don't exist. Right? So then Sakona in response is, I exist for you. So I just want to take a moment and tell everyone Sawubona, and then in response, you'll repeat back Sakona. Okay, are we good? Y'all got it? Okay. You know, sometimes we can be the worst students. Some of us teachers, we can be worse, right? Okay, here we go. Sawubona.
Sakona.
Yes, thank you. And it was a little light. Usually I make my students repeat it because, you know, I want to look, but it's okay. I will move on. But we get it, right? I think the importance today is to really see ourselves, see our panelists, and really do this thing called embodying racial justice, right? Embodying racial justice. My dad used to tell me that when we think we've got something just because we know it, we're wrong. We don't really have something until we live it, right? So today we are really pushing from this place of performance, the performative mission statements, the performative ways of doing racial justice, and really talking about how we embody it, how we live it, because we know that living something costs us something, right? Living something costs, and usually it costs us our self-examination, you know, the time and reflection, critical self-reflection, it costs. And so we're going to talk about all of that, all the ways that we do this work, we embody this work, but also the costs and the challenges associated with living something, not just knowing it. And so I want to introduce the panelists. I do want to introduce myself too, but I have a different way of doing that. But I am Sherria Taylor, assistant and professor in FINA. FINA, yes, y'all in the house. And my ooey gooey chair is Gus. I got to give him a shout out because he is so ooey gooey. And if you don't know him, you need to know him. And that's it for me. But I want to take a moment to introduce the panelists who are amazing. Maiya Evans, who is faculty in holistic health and public health. Maiya Evans teaches courses in holistic health studies and public health here, where she earned her master's of public health and community health education. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts in film, cinema, video studies, and sociology from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Much of her work examines the intersection between holistic health, public health, and social justice. Maiya has also worked as a health educator at UCSF and is a consultant for an anti-racism organization, the Mosaic Project, and was awarded the 2020-2021 Epic Community College Fellowship. Epic, that's amazing, okay? At Stanford University for her work on globalizing the public health curriculum. Wow. She is the founder of Hey Girl Health, a health, wellness, and culture brand that puts women of color at the center of the health conversation, and the host of the Health and Wellness podcast, the Hey Girl Health Show. She is currently working on a project entitled Celebrating Diversity and Culture in the Virtual Space. I just want to welcome Maiya. Everybody give Maiya a hand for joining us. And then we have the amazing Supriya Misra, who is an assistant professor in public health. Supriya's work focuses on mental health inequities among socially marginalized communities, particularly racial and ethnic minority groups. She uses mixed methods to understand the roles of discrimination, stigma, and trauma on the onset and experience of mental distress, and to promote dignity and justice for those living with mental illness. She completed her BA and MA in psychology at Stanford University And also, she's got awards too. My God, I can't even like read all these things, these letters. But she also worked for several years in a nonprofit management to develop and implement evidence-based health education resources. Supriya, I want to welcome you and thank you so much. Let's give Supriya a hand. And last but certainly not least, because this is my brother from another mother, Brandon Venerable. And his bio says that Brandon is a Black queer born and raised in Sacramento. His passion for public health administration and social justice stems from his own experiences navigating public and healthcare services as a young person. And he strongly believes in the importance of equipping underserved populations with the tools to not only survive, but thrive. He is also one of the founding members of the Race Collective in our college, which was formed with the goal of overseeing and engaging our community. Brandon holds a BS in Nutrition and Food Sciences from Sacramento State University and a master's recent graduate, yes, in Public Administration from San Francisco State. His academic and professional interests center on organizational development, specifically centering equity in the design of organizational structures, processes, and values. He currently serves as a senior global programs manager for a global health nonprofit, where he focuses on program management, organizational development, and strategy. In his free time, he enjoys reading, attending local drag shows, cooking new vegetarian and vegan recipes, and watching movies. Super well-rounded. We love you, Brandon. Please give Brandon a hand for joining us today. Yeah, so we've got an amazing panel. And again, I wanted to make sure that I introduce myself in a different way. And given that we're talking about embodying, what I believe is key to embodying racial justice is humanizing folk, humanizing us, humanizing who we serve, humanizing our students. There is something magical when we see each other. So before we start this panel, I want to introduce myself with this poem that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. It's 6 a.m. I'm awakened by a CNN alert rather than the sun. Another Black man killed by police. Seen as a threat and as a bother. No questions asked or warning given. I check my pulse. Am I still breathing? I head to my mirror bathroom, draw to grab my ovulation test. It's windows waiting for me to engage, but I'm moving slow because Black babies are not wanted. Black children aren't allowed to play. Black pregnant mothers are dying at 3 times the rate. I check my pulse. Am I still breathing? I turn to greet my Larry, to wish him well, to say his name, to say good morning, to hope he returns home, to hope our good morning is not actually a goodbye. He hugs me, but I'm scared, so I check my pulse. Am I still breathing? I gather myself, my trauma, my pain, and the ache inside, and I hold it all while I plan for the day. I reflect for a moment. How do I pour into my students and colleagues today? How do I give on empty? How can I be a ventilator while gasping for air? I'm drowning, so I check my pulse again to see if I'm still breathing. I sit down, zoom in, zoom out, PowerPoint in, PowerPoint out, share screen, but can't share my heart. I'm wondering if my trauma is showing. I take video off, take pauses for tears, as another CNN alert fills my screen. Am I smiling? Am I present? Do I have any questions? Do I have any answers for my students whose lives are filled with questions? I am giving them passion, or am I giving them pain? So I check my pulse quickly. Am I still breathing? Another meeting, business as usual. No one mentions the murders, the hate crimes, the threats, the injustice. No one acknowledges the pain, and we are all still drowning. Oh, but there's a vote. Do we make a statement about Black lives, or do we not? Do we take a survey to see how many Black authors we've cited this semester? But no one surveys the room. I'm here, but I'm invisible. I am Black faculty who teaches Black students. I'm here, I think. So I check my pulse to see if I'm still breathing. It's 9 p.m. My workday is just ending because a student needed me, needed to talk, needed to be seen. They told me they were suicidal and that their little sister just admitted to being molested by a relative. I'm triggered. My pain feels so kin to them. We share the same trauma. They're scared, and so am I. We cry, we lament. I encourage while holding my heart. I zoom out and I check my pulse. Am I still breathing? I lie down, head spinning, anxiety glaring, imposter syndrome speaking, and my phone buzzes. Another CNN alert. Policeman found guilty, but Ma'Khia Bryant found dead. I look over to see Larry. He's safe, he's sound, he's sleeping. I pull myself close to feel the comfort of solidarity. We are both here. Today we survived. We're alive, but are we still breathing? So, with that, I want to enter discussion with our panel and ask us how we are all still breathing, how we are doing as well. So before we get started, I would like for each of you to take some time. Please introduce yourself and discuss your work that embodies social justice and racial justice, and also just say, how are you? Maiya, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. And thank you, Sherria, for sharing that beautiful, beautiful poem. I was nodding all the way through, like, yep, felt that. So I've been sort of marinating on this question about how the work that I do embodies racial justice, because it really always has. I don't say that to be facetious, or it just really is baked into everything that I do. As a Black person in America, it just kind of comes with the territory. I couldn't get away from it if I could, if I tried, right? And then I've had, almost, 2 decades of training in doing racial justice work. I've been doing diversity and inclusion work for a long time, and I've been working with the Mosaic Project since 2009. And so really everything that I've brought with me in that work, I infuse into everything that I do. So even though, I teach classes on, health, holistic health, I don't see those things as separate from what I do. Okay, now we're going to talk about health. Now we're going to talk about race. Now we're going to talk about this. It's all together. You cannot separate the person from their environment or vice versa. We are really a product of our environment, and we influence the environments that we're in. And so for me, it really is all one big swirl that I bring into all of my work inside and outside of the classroom. And so it's something that I really try to embody and try to give space for students to really bring themselves and to express themselves fully as well.
Thank you. And how are you? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. I've been pretty juiced about speaking here, especially in this way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Supriya, introduce yourself and let's discuss what you're doing and what you care about is embodying racial justice, and also how are you?
Well, first of all, thank you for that poem. It really brought me really into the room, into this conversation in a way I wasn't feeling before. I was feeling nervous, to be honest. This is my first semester at SF State, and I chose to be here and in this college, in this department, to learn from everyone about how to do this work. It was work I didn't feel I could do at institutions I was at before. And while I do think I bring my whole self into it, I felt the constraints and the restrictions stifling me. So there's a freedom here. And I think I have a story that is different. And I've been reflecting a lot about being here because everything I've learned is from other people. And my friends have said, everyone has a place in the movement and it looks different for different people, but storytelling is one of the mechanisms for social change. So my process was to grow up believing in the meritocracy. My parents are immigrants from India. They told me to put my head down, work hard, and that I'd earn everything that I did. And that's what I did for a good chunk of my life. And things didn't feel right all the time, but I didn't always have words for it. And my passion is mental health, and I studied mental health, and I thought people are unhappy and distressed and not able to be their best whole selves, and I don't know why. Maybe I can just equip them with individual tools to maintain and manage their mental health. And there's definitely space and work for that. But it wasn't until I got politicized and it developed an analysis and understood the way that structures in society and the world lead to those distresses in the first place, and that's really where the mechanisms of change are, which wasn't until college. It was later in life than for some. And even then it took me a while, and I'm still learning. And so, you know, I have my research work that definitely like looks at these questions, but I think a lot about the work I do outside of that. And I've been doing mental health peer support for over a decade. And a lot of what we've done in that model has come from the kind of mainstream model of just creating and holding a space. And one of the ways that my peers and I are trying to push back on that is to think about how we bring our understanding of oppression into that work, how we can hold each other accountable while still supporting each other. And so my background, I didn't say at the beginning, is I'm South Asian. And so I grew up minoritized in the United States, but I also grew up with the privileges of my parents being upper middle class in India and being able to immigrate here and being fluent in English and highly educated. And so being able to hold both of those simultaneously, how can we support each other, acknowledge our privilege, and also create space for those in the margins within our community? So, and I embrace the label South Asian, but Indians are kind of the bullies of South Asia. So that's not always the place for me. So finding the places where identifying with other communities of color build solidarity and coalition and collaborative work, and also knowing when I need to step back and amplify the voices of others. And I there's more I could say, but I'm going to stop there. So thank you.
Supriya, you don't feel new, honey. You feel like an OG. You handled that introduction. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And how are you, Supriya? How are you doing?
Honestly overwhelmed, but
Okay.
I'm glad to be here, feeling so welcomed.
Okay, good. Thank you. And last but not least, Brandon, introduce yourself and what we're doing and what you're doing. You're doing more than just the Race Collective, but how does that embody racial justice for you? And I intentionally am asking you last because I want to chime in on our work together too.
Yay. Well, first, like, thank you to Sherria, because Lord Jesus, are you such a grounding person for me? Mm-hmm. She kind of went on the phone with me yesterday and we talked through some things, and I think I can't thank you enough for that. And just a shout out to the Full Race Collective and to the two folks that just spoke. Your introductions were powerful, and I'm honored to be on a panel with you all. I'm gonna start with how I feel, because honestly, sadness, anger, uncomfortability, I think describes me right now. But the beauty of this room and the beauty of this space is kind of uplifting me. So I want to thank you all for that. So yeah, my name is Brandon Venerable. I go by he and his pronouns. I am a queer Black person, native of Sacramento, California. I thought a lot about this question, like how my work embodies racial justice, because I feel as though I'm a novice compared to a lot of these folks, either in this room or on this panel. But then I realized, through conversations with my partner and conversations with community members, and, as Maiya said as well, is like being Black, that work and that experience, that identity is always embedded in what you do. So I think that really drew me to my interests within nutrition. I had a lot of interest and passion for food justice, sustainability. Growing up poor in Sacramento, I wondered why a convenience store was the closest grocery store for me to get food. I wondered why being on Medicare and Medi-Cal was so hard to get medication and products. And so being the first in my family to get a college degree, the first in my family to get a master's, my grandfather always taught me different ways to navigate through these spaces, to navigate around whiteness, to kind of minimize myself. If your hair is nappy, white people ain't happy. That's what I grew up hearing. And so I take that into my work with organizational development, because I truly believe that organizations and institutions, they have so much power to enact change, but they also have so much power to create oppression. And so I'm passionate about really looking at what are the institutional arrangements and structures that support white supremacy, and how do we dismantle them? How do we look at these things through a different lens? You know, how do we reimagine or rebuild something in an image that fits us? Because I think learning through grad school, specifically within like public policy, the Constitution, it was never meant for us. It was never written for us. It was never written in our image. And so the system works for who it's supposed to work for. So how is folks in education and academia and our professional lives, how can we change that? And so that really drew me to the Race Collective. And quite honestly, I was hesitant to join because an institution that has power, that has, you know, a history of oppression, not SF State in general, but just academia, I was conscious about, you know, how that, would I create more harm than doing good by joining this? But honestly, through my experience, you know, with, you know, Alvin and the rest of these folks, it really transformed my thinking, and also my hope that there are some kind of methods and modes that can actually make change. And, you know, Alvin did a great job talking about the Race Collective, so I won't go into too much detail there. But honestly, how my work embodies racial justice is survival. I think that's the only thing that it comes to, is survival. I want to talk a lot about that today, and, you know, and challenges and stuff, but my work embodies it because I know that if I don't use my privilege and the education that I received to dismantle some of these institutional arrangements, some Black queer person will not survive. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, and our existence is our resistance, right? And so I agree with you on that. And I would just say for us too, that for me, the Race Collective, how it's embodying is by doing and by creating a space for being unapologetically, right? And for me, you know, that's what separates the performative from embodiment, is the actual doing of something, changing something, doing something, creating something. I hear a lot about, you know, it's just so much work and I'm so tired. It's like, welcome. Okay, I'm tired daily. Welcome. And so I get it, but like, come on, like this is the work. This is what it feels like. You know, it's exhausting, but it's needed. So, all right. My dad's a preacher, y'all, so I'm a little long-winded, so I gotta check myself with the timing. But I will go to the next question. And Maiya, what are the most pressing issues related to your work, specifically around the racial justice aspect of this? What's most pressing?
So to say what's the most pressing is really complicated, because every issue these days is a pressing issue. I mean, we just had a huge verdict happen a couple days ago, and it has really shaped, really, I think, what is the future of our country, because there is a different framing of how we see the fact that we're having this conversation like this, calling it racial justice. This language did not exist just the last year. We weren't talking about things like this, like out front and center, right? So I think that just the being able to bring what's outside and allowing students to express what's inside and letting those two things meet is what is the most pressing. Because we have to see racial justice, as so many speakers have said today, as within all of us. We are all doing this. We're all a part of it. And guess what? Underneath all of these letters and degrees and all of these things, we're also human beings. And we bring all of that into the classroom. We bring our thoughts and opinions and biases, as some of the folks have expressed before, into these classrooms. And we have to be vulnerable and honest, and we have to allow space for students to do that as well. And that's what's most pressing, is the ability to be able to call things as we see it, be able to have real conversations about it, not feel the need to sugarcoat or make things PC, but have things be ugly for a little bit before they get buttoned up, right? So that's how I see what's most pressing right now.
Yeah. And what about, Maiya, your work with the Health Girl, Hey Girl Health podcast work and that community work? What do you see happening? What's needed
My
particularly for
goodness.
Black women and Black girls.
Yeah, I mean, so I've had so many amazing speakers. A lot of them, my colleagues here at San Francisco State, which is wonderful as well. The first person I had on my show was a social worker, and she talked about. We talked about defunding the police. It was really, happening. This was last June when I started this podcast, and one thing that she said that was so powerful, because she's a social worker who works in schools, was that it's not necessarily the police, but it's the educators who are the biggest, who can be the biggest bullies, who can be the biggest perpetuators of violence, because somebody has to call the police on students. So things like that really allowed me to not only reflect on my own educational experience, but how I am as a teacher, how I come into the classroom. So, the premise of my show, it's looking at the issues that impact women of color and their communities, because we are our communities as well. You can't just separate us out, right? And so it's really just being able to see our systems for what they are, and seeing how we've learned to dysfunction and dysfunction for a very long time. And how do we hold space for that, for students to really be able to come to their own sense of recognition of that. Like, wait a minute, I've been in the matrix this whole time, and holy moly, this is a whole nother chapter. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Thank you. Oh, it does. Thank you. Supriya, what's most pressing in your work? What issue? I guess I should have rephrased that question. What's not most pressing? Maybe that would have been a better question. But for the sake of our planning, what is most pressing in your work, in your communities that you serve, and students, however you want to address it?
No, I agree that picking one is impossible. I think that a couple of things that stand out to me is from the public health lens, that the pandemic has made people realize public health is not apolitical, and we have an opportunity here. And many of my colleagues who are researchers, or especially epidemiologists who have seen themselves as neutral parties presenting data, are starting to see that data are biased and data are integral to how we interpret the world. So in terms of teaching, of course, I'm teaching the research methods class, so I'm hoping that the students find that passion with me. But even outside of that, in the profession, I think that it's a unique moment in time for people to actually use the word racism as a public health crisis. And then I also am very much about, like, one of the things that drew me to this department is how do we move towards what we're building towards. And so I have often not been clear where my role in the abolition work is in terms of abolishing the police and carceral systems. But a friend pointed out to me that since these systems are the largest mental health providers in the country right now, part of what we imagine as the future is alternatives to community mental health. And that's something I feel like in the pandemic is also intertwined, is we've also been able to talk about mental health so much more, and in our classrooms with our students, but also in the type of works we do to support each other outside of systems. Obviously, clinical mental health is important, but we're also starting to imagine collective care outside of those spaces. And I want to shout out that, like, a lot of it is like finding examples, and so we don't have to create them. So I moved to Oakland and I learned about MH First Oakland, which is an alternative policing crisis response mental health care program. And I was so excited because these programs are already being created. And so for me, if as someone who's like newer to the work, it's finding the leaders who are already doing the work. And for me, those leaders are community organizers and always students. So I'm excited to learn from the students here. And I was very excited that the Cal Student Association last week passed a resolution marking caste as a discrimination category, because for us in the South Asian community, dealing with the fact that caste has been brought over into the diaspora, which there's been a lot of denial about, is an urgent issue. And I guess that there's so much more. The last thing I'll say is the anti-Asian, anti-Black solidarity that's happening right now with the BLM movements from last summer and then the recent attacks against Asians. I think there's an opportunity to build more coalitions of power. There's a lot of unlearning for Asians to do, for sure. And so I think the work starts at home. But I also think there's also a recognition happening for many people for the first time of the discrimination that Asian groups also experience. And I'll stop there.
Wow, Supriya, thank you. I just kind of want to think I'm gonna have to do this every time you talk, Supriya. Oh, I see why you may feel overwhelmed, child. You got so much in you, and you gotta let that stuff out. Wow. Brandon, what's most pressing going on in your community and even in our work? What do you feel is the most pressing issue or issues?
I mean, that list can go on and on and on. I think, right now I think of a lot of safety, right? How do we create systems and spaces that are safe for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to operate in, to grow in, to live in, and to exist in? And I think of that from the perspective of academia, but also organizations, right? So how, understanding that someone who is inadequately equipped to talk about race or who hasn't done their own unlearning can cause great harm. So, and I think about that just from a place of like education, right? If we're talking about these things of like management practice, organization design, public health, and it's coming from someone who's not done their own healing, how harmful that can be. So that's one of the issues that stresses me out the most, but also thinking about this performative habits of diversity and inclusion. There's been years and years and years of work to get, Black folks and people of color into these organizations, but then they only get entry-level positions. They're stuck at middle management. But when you look at organizational racism, the root of that is because they're not the decision makers. They don't control resources. They're not the one making stakeholder connections. There's no one at the table checking their ignorances, and so I look at the fact that like that centers around power, privilege, and, dismantling that and untangling that is super important for me. And, bringing my personal into it, I'm Black, I'm queer, I paint my nails different colors each week. And I was not able to do that until I got to a senior position, until I got a master's degree, because that's safety, right? That's my protection. That's my privilege protection that a lot of my other, Black trans sisters that can't do, right? And so I think about that, and I think about that within the lens of toxic professionalism, which I think is the root of where I'm at right now. When I hate professionalism, I hate it because it's so rooted in white masculinity. It's so rooted in washing out our beautiful identities and boiling it down to something that's palatable for people who are afraid of their power. And so I think as we do our work and as we have these conversations, especially the folks who are listening on this call, you're in spaces where you may be operating in and upholding professionalism. Why is that? Assess that and have that internal conversation, because at the end of the day, our beauty comes from our diversity in thought, our diversity in how we dress, how we express our gender, how we express our identities. And so I really am curious on how we can like marry racial justice while dismantling professionalism at the same time.
Right, yeah. And I agree with you on that, Brendan. I feel like what's most pressing for me is our survivance and the survivance of BIPOC students, BIPOC faculty, colleagues, and staff, and not from like you were saying. I feel like I was raised to know that I can't bring my full self to work or to meetings because that is not allowed, and you may lose your job, right? Or you may not get this grant, or you may not, and so what I'm seeing though now as a result is, yeah, we're resilient, but what I'm also seeing is heart attacks, obesity, mental health, depression, anxiety. What I'm also seeing is a lot of, there has been a cost, right? Like, so for many of us, it's like, we're here, but how are we doing? I cannot tell you how many meetings I've sat in with women of color colleagues, many who hold higher up positions than me, in tears, crying, burnout, ready to quit. Like, at what point, right? At what point is that not okay? So I just want the ability for us to show up and be ourselves, and in a way that Brandon, you brought up something, I'm gonna steal it. Brandon talked about last night, he's like, can our trauma be included in some kind of policy? Like, can I take a sick day or not, can we, is there a way that what we're dealing with, can it be acknowledged on so many levels that will protect us, that will save many of us, that will keep faculty on these campuses, keep students in these programs? When students are saying stuff is toxic, can we listen? I want us to survive, but more than that, I want us to thrive. That's what's most pressing for me. I'm tired of the costs. All right. With that being said, what are the challenges of doing this work? And what opportunities do you foresee to further the work? Maiya, we'll start with you again.
I mean, you all just said it. All of what you just said, Brandon and Sherria and Supriya, the challenges, just they can be endless. A big part of the reason why I started the Hey Girl Health Show is because of that trauma, especially among Black women, and the health outcomes, and how can no one else see this? Oh my God, we have to do something about it, right? So the challenge for any of us who teach here know that teaching is such a small part of the job. As you all have said before, we are counselors. We are there supporting our students. We are doing so much more than grading and lesson planning. We're actually really trying to, especially in this time, we've really just been trying to hold our students together, and if I'm being quite honest, hold ourselves together. As you mentioned, Sherria, I've been trying to hold myself together in all of this while supporting all of these other wonderful humans. So that's a huge part of the challenge is how can I do my job and what I need to do, and also be able to balance all of these other things that are happening. In terms of the hope and what we can do, I think that this is a huge part of it. Being able to have these conversations, real open conversations about who we are, how we come into this space, who our students are. Something that I want to mention as well, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about racial justice, we sometimes talk about it, I think you, Dr. Alvarez, you mentioned, I think you said amorphous, it's amorphous thing way out in the distance. But for example, if you see, that certain dynamics are happening in, whether it's in a professional space, in a classroom, you have the power. I think, Brandon, you said this, you have the power to change those dynamics, right? So if you see that there are marginalized people within the space, even if you don't belong to those communities, right? So if I see that, for example, something that happens a lot in my classrooms is that the Asian American students tend to be a little bit quieter. So if I make it that the only way you can get participation points is if you speak in class all the time and are always talking and raising your hand, is that really truly equity? Is that being fair to all of the students, right? And the thing is, it's an observation, but I'm saying, okay, how can I make this more equitable? How can I make space so that everybody feels included, everybody can talk? So then I do maybe small groups, pair shares, breakout groups, so that everybody can still feel included and they're not punished for not having, as you said, Brandon, the professionalism that, of the standard I have set. And by the way, probably that the institution has set that I'm following as well. So the hope and something that we can do is just pay attention. I do diversity trainings all the time. And the truth is, you really can understand what racial justice is and how to make more diverse spaces if you commit to it. You gotta wanna do it. You gotta wanna understand. I have talked so many people through the Rubik's Cube of what systemic racism is, and they have tied themselves up in knots because they're like, I don't get it. And I'm like, okay. But at some point you have to be willing to say, you know what? This is the system that we live in. This is how I'm benefiting in the system. This is what I'm not doing. And something that we say a lot in the Mosaic Project is we see we see what we expect to see, but we don't see what we don't expect to see. So what are you not seeing? What do you don't know? What do you not know that you don't know? You have to really be willing to do that work, that cultural humility, to really open yourself up to say, wait a minute, how can I do more? And then how can I create a community and a space for others to get on board with that? And how can I hold the institutional accountable so that they can also get on board? So the work that you all are doing in race is wonderful. So if we can continue down that path, truly, not just talking, but to truly do it and to truly infuse and bake it into the institution and how we serve our students and our communities, that is the hope that I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Maiya. All right, Supriya.
That was, I mean, for the institution, I'm still learning, and I'm learning so much from race. And Maiya, what you were just talking about, I think in the classroom is a place I think about it a lot. As a student, I did diversity and inclusion work, and we talked so much about bringing in diverse students, but not about changing the structures so that they could thrive and function in those systems. And that was a thing that Alvin set up today. So I think it's something everyone's really thinking about. And I think about that toxic professionals, and that phrase is beautiful because I think about that a lot with deadlines. I ask for extensions all the time as a professional. And so one thing with students is talking to them about why we have deadlines. Some of the assignments build on each other. So if you don't get this earlier concept, later concepts might be challenging. And I always offer makeup opportunities, but trying to ask students to set those deadlines for themselves, to understand the shared process of accountability that we need to, I need to know assignments coming in, but I also understand that when that comes in might differ. And then they can understand where that fits into my goals. So I'm learning a lot and experimenting a lot, and we'll see what my course evals say, but I think that is a challenge. And then same with mental health, I find my students are so nervous to tell me that mental health is the reason they're having challenges this semester, because it's not documentable with the doctor's note or whatever they think that they owe me. And to just have grace with that and to acknowledge it. And I've even just listing resources at the bottom of my email that they haven't asked for. They haven't even necessarily used the words mental health, but just normalizing, not just CAPS, but maybe other resources that feel relevant. One of my students told me about loss in her family. And so I happened to volunteer with a grief organization. So I included that. So just thinking about ways that we think of the students as whole people is on my mind a lot, especially since I'm new here. And then outside of that, I think a lot about pedagogy in general, and that a lot of our research methods and our statistical tools were developed for racist reasons. And how can we integrate that into our understanding, our curriculum? And I'm not there yet. That's like things I'm trying to learn how to teach my class right now, but how can we bring those conversations into the work, and to know which tools we're using and why, and even little things like averages erase our differences. And so, yes, we need to understand how averages work, and we also need to know that they hide disparities a lot of the time. So in the academic setting, that's a lot of what I'm thinking about.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Brandon. You're getting lots of love on your term. You might need to coin it, do the trademark it, do something. Patent. I don't know what the thing is, y'all, what we do. Copyright. I think that's the right one. But yeah, so what do you think, Brandon, are the challenges of doing this work and any opportunities that you see?
Yeah, I think go back to like the performative talk conversation and talk about progress, like the word progress. Because I've been toying with this a lot because I see this, like we're progressing, there's progress. Then I wonder, who's defining what progress means for my Black body? Because a lot of times your white mind can't comprehend what my Black body needs. And I've been in so many spaces where I have been told what is progress for their organization or for their institution, or that this event, this or this, that is going to be that progress. But how do you bring it from like that theoretical environment down to the practical solutions and systems that you need to change? And a lot of times I feel like folks and organizations hide behind the word of progress or check that box, but not actually do the work. And so that's one challenge I see that I'm stressed out about. The second kind of goes back to professionalism, but it's more as this business as usual. yesterday I had a call with a client, and 3 minutes before I saw, Maiya Bryant doing one of her videos of her hair, and I bawled and I cried. But I had to wipe my tears and turn on my Zoom camera and go back to work. And then I kind of thought, like, why is that, And over the summer, and I want to talk a little bit about something I enacted at my organization. When the George Floyd protests were happening, my organization and my boss said, take your time. But that's not enough. You know what I mean? We need policy, we need change, we need structures that support ourselves to process our trauma so that we don't feel we're overburdening the organization. So she said, what do you recommend? I said, let's shut this shit down, right? Next 72 hours, let's close our organization. Let's put a banner on our website. Let's put a banner on our emails and give the employees time to reflect, to learn, or to act, right? Those are your only things that you're doing for 72 hours. I went to the streets to protest. I had some white colleagues who, watched videos, did this, and another Black colleague who held a learning circle for them. But I'm like, that's what I'm talking about organizational change to actually embody racial justice. You know what I mean? Don't just say you can do something. What are your practical solutions and policies and processes and procedures that you're going to change so that folks can take that space? Because as Sherria was mentioning yesterday, I read this quote or this post. One of my colleagues was talking about how, referencing business as usual, but like, what about bereavement leave? Like, Black folks need bereavement leave for the trauma that we're always experiencing, seeing our kinfolk shot and killed on the police. But then we feel bad for using, like, why should we have to use our sick time and our vacation time to deal with the trauma that a system is oppressing on us that we didn't create? And so when I'm talking about how we bring that down, the opportunities are really getting out of that theoretical realm, getting out of this caught up on the words of progress or change. Do the work. If you have power to write a new policy, or you sit in a space with all these executives, be the voice of folks who aren't there. Because that's what storytelling is about. Tell a story that's not yours at that table, because that could be life or death for someone. And if we truly want to create and nurture new leaders, there's no other way you can nurture new leaders if you don't protect them first. Maiya was 16 years old, right? She will never be able to be a nurtured new leader because we failed. So how do we, go past that performative aspects and go past that and actually do the work? And it just starts with our everyday lives. We can do that. Yeah.
Thank you. I call Brandon Bishop Venerable. If anybody want to take up an offering right now, we can Venmo. Sorry, I was raised in church, though. It's in my bones. Okay, so this has been really great. I think for me personally, I think some of the challenges and opportunities are the same. One being, for instance, challenges being that many times doing this work, it's folks of color are in the forefront. Folks of color are doing the pulling. Folks of color are doing the pushing. Folks of color are doing the protesting. Folks of color are being, saying something's wrong. Folks of color are the ones, and so that's a challenge, right? When you're already exhausted. These past few weeks, watching the trial and all of that, it's like, wow, I'm tired again. I felt it again. The depression and the anxiety, and meetings were a struggle, things were a struggle. But yet I need to do X, Y, Z. So that's a challenge. But I also think the opportunity in that, if I flip that, is that we should be the one saying what policies are needed, because how you gonna tell us? Like, I don't know what else. How else is there, like the bereavement? I don't know if anybody else would have thought of that. But Brandon, so that's also the opportunity, right? Is if space is created where our voices are heard, and not just for the sake of having a listening session and then doing nothing with that. But if the goal really is to do something, and we create a safe space where folks can come and say, yo, this RTP stuff, it ain't right. Service looks different for me. What we gonna do about it? right? I got students coming to me from all over the university, sitting in front of the Zoom before it was my office. How can I get some recognition of that in my RTP, right? The minority tax. How can that somehow be embedded in our RTP? Like, so I see the opportunity in that, because how else will you know, right? Like, how else will things be recreated and co-constructed without hearing our voice? But I think the key to that is that the space is safe, it is treated as sacred, and we see something at the end of the day, right? Like, it is embodied. We are tired of the performative. I took a workshop on how to write a mission and a vision statement, but I'm telling y'all, I'm over it. I am over the mission statements. You know, at what point are we going to go around our college and go, okay, let's look at programs. Mission says this. Is that actually happening? And if it's not, if our curriculum does not align, right? If I don't see some stuff embedded, are we going to do something? Like, at what point? I think, you know, for me, that's the challenge and the opportunity is we're exhausted, but yet I also believe when we're at the table, there is something that we can offer that is invaluable and needed. So that for me are the largest things that stick out for me when it comes to challenges and opportunities. So I want to move us into question and answer. And I also recognize that this kind of panel is it might be a little strange to ask a question, right? I can feel the pins and needles, right? So I acknowledge that and I honor that. So I don't, you know, it's okay to not ask a question and just take it all in. It's okay. I am ready with my own questions if needed. So I want to acknowledge that. So no pressure for y'all to just try to pull something out from somewhere. It's okay. But I do want to create a space though where we can have, I think a key that we are learning in our healing circles and in these moments is having hard conversations too. You know, the vulnerability it takes. And we know as panelists and folks of color, you know, we know. So, but do recognize that this past week has been rough and there's a lot going on. So just try to honor that in this moment too. Okay. But please send Nicole and or Susan your questions so that we can make sure we're also kind of filtering, and as well as just making sure we're not asking the same question over and over again. But I see there's about 3 questions that have come through. So and this is for everyone. This is from Zubaida. Is inclusivity the goal of racial justice in all your work? Oh, Zubaida. Is inclusivity the goal of racial justice in all your work? And that's for anybody. Anybody can feel free to answer this question. Anybody want to answer?
I will try, but please, Maiya or Brendan, feel free. For me, I actually don't think inclusivity is really, it's like a side process, because inclusivity is within the existing systems. And as we were talking about, it's really about reimagining and recreating systems in the first place. So maybe that's kind of what we do while we're moving towards the actual end goal, because we shouldn't not deal with the people who are existing today and are in these structures. But I would like to focus more on imagining new structures altogether.
Anyone else?
Everything that Supriya just said.
Yeah,
that was beautiful. Yes.
well said. Yeah. And I would say, you know, as long as inclusivity isn't tokenism, you know, I feel as if that word has come to represent tokenism. And if we're still not seeing folks, hearing folks, really, you know, really sharing power, Like, not bringing folks to the table to hear what they got to say and then do nothing, and then like kind of veto what they say, in terms of like students come and they share their hearts and we're like, thanks for sharing, bye. Like, that is not, that's tokenism. That's not inclusivity. And so for me, I don't know, that the word has kind of lost some of its luster, but I'm like, sawa bonus sakona. That's my goal. I see you. I see the whole person. That's what I want for anybody and everybody who shows up. That's what I want. I think another question is about toxic professionalism. And I think that's going to be a keyword we all take home and somehow put it on a t-shirt. Tell us more about it and with some of your experiences that any of you have had with that toxic professionalism. I think folks want the tea, the good stuff. That's what the tea means. Yes, folks want the tea on toxic professionalism. What's that been like? And how do we maybe define that too a little further?
Wow. From my own experience, I think it was just before I came out and, being Black, wanting to get out of poverty, I was like, how do I access these spaces? How do I get money to survive? Because quite frankly, I knew I was going to take care of my mother who, she's bipolar and she's disabled. So I have to take care of her. And I think that's something that a lot of folks, especially Black folks, can relate to. So accessing those spaces, either internships or work, because I did tech before this, I had to present as very masculine. I had to tone back my Blackness. I had to code switch so that I can present in like, I can't paint my nails. I can't wear clothes too tight because I would get commented on. I would do a fade for my hair because I was worried that my nappiness would be aggressive for folks. I was worried about being aggressive or too loud in a space. There was often a lot of times where folks would only know me through email correspondence. And then we would meet for a meeting and I would sit to see if this person would come up to me as if I was that person we were talking to. And they would go up to every other person who they thought was Brandon Venerable, whether it was a white man next to me or something or another, never me, because they couldn't fathom that person in that email was me. And so I kind of connect those with toxic professionalism is their assumptions that they have on me, my body, my presence, and what they assume I'm going to bring into space, they assume I should bring into the space. Yeah. I don't know if that defines it. I don't know if there's any way to define it. I think it's just trash in general. But I just
toxic professionalism definition: trash. Is there a trash emoji we can put up? Yes. I feel that, and I just agree. I have nothing else to add to that, Brian. Nothing else to add to that. Anybody else want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I think also toxic professionalism is also professionalism that can be toxic to you and your own values and well-being, and trying to maintain this level of professionalism that really is not healthy for you, or really good at the end of the day, not good for the students. I feel like, when I first started teaching, I had this blazer and I was like, I'm gonna be this like professor. And I had to look a certain way, right? But then also, how much am I gonna call it like I see it? What we've seen, not only in the last year, but the past 4 years, has been utterly ridiculous. And we've been in the twilight zone, and we've been just learning to function in this really crazy alternative universe. But I have never been so honest, loose-lipped, non-PC in the past, a couple of years, because I'm like, nah, I can't hold my tongue on this. I can't, try to, do this delicate balance of, trying to respect everyone's values and not trying to say too much. And I know that we have to look at all perspectives. At some point we have to say, this is some bull, and that's it, period. You need to know that this ain't normal. Because truthfully, a lot of these young folks don't know that how abnormal this is. This is not normal. You need to know it. You need to know why these people are terrible. You need to know why they're terrible. We need to know why that these are human rights violations, and no, nothing less. We need to call it like it is. So I've just been more vocal and just just more honest in that way, and that toxic professionalism of feeling like I can't say those or I shouldn't say those things has been put to the side a little bit, which is very liberating.
Yes, but I think too, Maiya, there's a reciprocity that happens there in terms of, though, when you bring your full self, it creates a space for students to bring their full selves. And we can't talk about cultural wealth, right? And really acknowledging students' cultural wealth and bringing that into the classroom if we're not modeling that to some extent, and to a large extent for BIPOC folks and queer folks and LGBTQ. If we're not bringing our full selves, they will get the message that they can't bring their full selves, right? Now, I admit some of us need to work on our full self. some of ourselves need to stay at home. I'm sorry. Okay, it's the truth. Like, what I'm sorry. Okay. Anybody else want to add? Anybody else want to add to that question? Yes, some selves need to stay at home, get some sleep, reflect, come out when it's safe. All right, there's another question. I really like this question because this is something we wrestled with as a race collective, and in terms of how does healing happen, right? Can healing happen in isolation? How does healing happen? And I could just say, like, how has healing happened for you and in the spaces that you've existed in? I like that question.
I'd love to share. And it may sound a little bit corny, and I swear I'm not trying to be cliche, but my students and teaching have been really one of the things that have really anchored me in all of this, with everything that just really went a little nuts for a while. Having that purpose of getting to my classroom, virtual, albeit virtual, and being able to teach and have to pull the inspiration out of myself, by the way, because it's not always there, okay? Because listen, last June, I was like, how am I going to teach a class on health and wellness when I'm mad? How am I going to do this when I don't even know what to do with myself? But having to have to do it, having to have to be inspirational, having to have to teach somebody something so they can get something out of this thing, really has been the thing that has, for me, provided a lot of healing for me. And I'm also doing work with SF Builds, which is, working with STEM students, mostly of color. And we're doing meditation sessions, and we're doing a research project on how we can bring mindfulness into the classroom with students of color, and how we can allow them to, a lot of things that have come up is around trauma. How do we allow them to bring all that they are and their trauma, and how can they get some healing, with mindfulness? And for me to do that work allows me to put everything aside and give, because we all know that giving, you get so much more when you give. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's where I found my healing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Supriya or Brandon, any thoughts on how healing occurred? How's it occurred for you? And what does it look like? What should it look like?
I'm really struck by the question of healing can occur in isolation, because I want to be open to perhaps it can. But what I think about is that so much of the healing is from the harms, whether intended or unintended, we experience from the world outside. And so for me, all of my healing has occurred in community. In part of it is naming that harm. Sometimes that's having accountability, and sometimes it's not, but it's being recognized for it. And I've learned a lot from the transformative justice frameworks for the language around that, of like, you don't always need forgiveness, but sometimes you need to name what happened. And so when I think about the classroom, I think it used to be really hard for me that I had to earn trust. I liked the idea of trust being the default, and then like you lose it. And so taking a more trauma-informed understanding for why people might have reasons not to trust at the outset, and that it is my responsibility, not just in the classroom, but in any space, to know that there may be ways people have been harmed that are not visible to me. is a thing I've been really working on, because I take it personally. Why don't you trust me right away? And I think that's a big part of healing. And then the last that motivates me around, again, a public health mental health framework is practicing what we talk about. So modeling, like not overworking. I think the overwork culture, at least amongst my peers and other places, is really harmful. And so modeling, creating rest, joy, the pursuit of things for one's own fulfillment, and modeling sharing that. I think it's hard. We're still learning how to share joy, celebration moments. So now amongst my peers, we've created a culture of sharing all of our accomplishments instead of only turning to each other when we're having hard times. And that was work. It was work to model that and do it first and not look like you're bragging, so that people know that we can celebrate our joys together.
Thank you. Brandon.
Yeah, a lot of that, what you said, Supriya, resonated with me. A lot of that around, that unlearning the toxic work habits. I think that's, I struggle with that because I work myself into the ground, and my partner, he's right here, but he always just sees me, and I think like leaving grad school, I've been replacing that energy with work, and I've been trying to be more intentional about replacing that with like art and things that bring me joy. But for me, healing definitely comes from community and my chosen family. And I think the biggest lesson of that was COVID, where I'm a social person. I love to go to drag shows. I love to go out. I love to meet people. And you can always find me like at a bar having a deep social justice conversation with someone, because I truly believe you're able to just make those connections. You can make that change. But not having that, I had to rely, on my community that's close to me with these queer folks. And, they were really the bedrock of how I survived the pandemic. Having people who are going through a similar struggle, whether with our identities, mental health, financially, but being able to be open and honest that we are struggling and that we are sinking, and being there together was really healing. The Race Collective, that became a healing space for me. Being able to have conversations with folks from different places who are in different professional realms, and we kind of dismantled all those silos of power, and we just showed up and talked about ourselves, and that was powerful. And also knowing that we're trying to do work for the community as well. And I think self-healing has come with reminding myself that I'm the shit. And I only say that is because like the world beats us down so much. And I've had to be like, okay, I have to remind myself that I am powerful, and that I am meant to be in this world, and that I am deserving of good things, no matter what the media, society says. And so healing comes from reminding myself of my own internal power, and that I don't need to have a degree or show up in a happy place or do anything to deserve, wellness. So that's been my, I think, journey through healing for the past year. Yeah.
I love that, because that imposter syndrome is real, right? For us and for our students, because the world is giving us messages that we shouldn't be here. We're not enough. We're not smart enough. I remember hearing as a Black girl, you're really good at math for a Black girl. I was like, Egyptians didn't do math. I mean, I was surprised, and teacher said that to me. I was like, those pyramids, like, what was they doing? Like, I don't get it. But, so the imposter syndrome, it's deeply rooted in us hearing, and some of us even internalizing that we're not enough, right? I would say, for me, what's healing is I watched Iyanla Fix My Life. Y'all seen Iyanla Fix My Life? I think we need Iyanla Fix Our University. But she always talks about calling a thing a thing. Call a thing a thing. Kind of Maiya, what you were saying. Name it. Call a thing a thing. I think for me, what's been healing is the ability to name things like white supremacy, racism, anti-Black racism. Having conversations and we're able to call a thing has been the most healing for me, and the most powerful, because I didn't realize how much throughout my life I was holding my breath, and not saying things and keeping things to myself, and then going home and beating myself up because I felt complicit in someone's oppression and even my own oppression. And I didn't realize that by calling a thing, like I was engaging in my own healing, however risky it was and however risky it felt. I would get the benefit of healing the historical trauma that lives in my body. I would get the benefit of healing those who heard me call a thing who weren't at the point where they could speak. And so for me, the healing is when we can come together and call it what it is, not sugarcoat, not be PC. What is PC at this point? The past 4 years have been a whole other level of PC. I think Trump just blew it out the water. There is literally no PC anymore. So I can thank him for that. You know, he has redefined what PC was, but calling a thing, calling it what it is, instead of like, I wonder if they're just like not coming to class. Well, you know, let's call a thing. That's been very healing for me. All right, I think I'm gonna do one last question and then we'll kind of wrap things up. My sis, Yan Shim, asked about, and I may not, because the way it's written, let's see, it's in here. If we have an experience that our past trauma, oh yes, okay. Have an experience that with regards to our past trauma was so overwhelmingly like surfacing or present regarding racial justice or injustice during our conversations with students or at work. Have we had an experience like that? And how did we deal with it? Where the past trauma was overwhelmingly kind of resurfacing or triggering something happening in this kind of space of racial justice and injustice, either with conversations with students or in training or at work. And if so, how do we deal with it? And this actually, can we tag this on to my last question? And that is, how do y'all engage in radical self-care? Because I asked this question in all of my groups, even our Women of Color group that we've been holding, because I believe this past year has required redefining what self-care means, right? I don't believe like, I'm just gonna go for a walk. Like that really has not been the thing that has worked for many of us. It's been a radical self-care. It's been a really digging very deep to figure out how we anchor ourselves while we are drowning, right? That is different than going for a walk. That requires a whole different way of being. So let's connect those questions. How do we deal with something that was triggering, traumatic, but also how are we engaging in radical self-care? Because I think this is our lived experience, right? Often experiencing very traumatic, triggering moments, microaggressions. I don't like to call them micro, I call them macroaggressions. That's what they feel like. How are we taking care of ourselves and how have we dealt with moments that have been very overwhelming?
I guess you can go first.
Yes.
For me, I think the one example that I had is just when, you know, the protests were happening and then you had the incident at the Capitol that stirs up a lot within folks around you, right? And so we had, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Slack, just like a messaging platform, and basically some colleagues were posting pictures of the folks who stormed the Capitol and laughing about how funny their outfits looked. And I'm sitting there thinking about how the folks in DC, you know, the Black folks in DC may be getting killed after this, or X and Y is happening, or my democracy is failing. And I had to I wanted to go in, right? I was angry, I was irritated, and I had to take a step back and realize, A, it cannot always be my responsibility to check white folks on their ignorance, because I have to protect my energy. And so my radical self-care is trying to not always feel like I need to address someone's ignorance to protect my own self. Because at the end of the day, I can't pour from an empty cup. And so I've been trying to unlearn this habit of always being the one to respond or having to educate someone, because that can't always be my job. It has to be a shared responsibility. And also, I'm not paid to educate you on your whiteness. And so I can't do that today. So that's been one biggest thing for my radical self-care. Also being kind to myself in my mistakes. So I think I'm really also trying to do this journey of unlearning a lot of toxic habits of either, you know, from childhood or from family or from whatnot. And so being, I guess, nice to myself when I make those mistakes and really do self-reflection and knowing that I'm on my own journey as well. And I don't need to be this perfect, immaculate person when I show up.
Love it. Thank you. That'll be another t-shirt. I'm not paid to deal with you. Okay. Supriya and Maiya, we got lots of t-shirts, Brandon.
I feel like you're gesturing for me to go first. I feel like when students or others share, even if it's not my own shared trauma, it's usually incredibly hard for me. I don't know if that gets easier, but it feels like an honor. And I think that holding that honor is important. And also being a human is okay. So sometimes I tell the students that brought up feeling, or the person, to an extent that doesn't infringe on their need. It's okay to share that humanity and share that moment together, I think. And to break the barrier of professor student is okay, and to expect share our shared humanity. My students who share mental health issues, I had mental health struggles in college, and so I share when I was in college. That was the case for me too, and I talk about it to show that it's not something that I don't like, both to show that I understand it, this is hard to talk about, and also to show that, you know, it can evolve and change over time, and share where I am now. Not to say like it'll be the same for everyone. And then I think radical self-care, I don't know that I have thought of that way. It's like I'm an incredibly relational person, but also relationships are exhausting because I'm an introvert. So it's, for me, it's having those, for me, it's having those few people who, even the things Brandon was describing, like I need a friend to tell. I said, no, I didn't do this thing. I didn't engage in this fight on Slack. I need to tell someone, to have them bear witness to those options I made, those choices I made, to brag, I guess. And then the last thing I think is just really, for me, the weakness is the overwork, is always feeling a responsibility to do more in my free time. And so also bragging about when I don't work is an important part of it, and telling other people. And one of the ways to do that is with other people, because when you make plans, then you have to follow through. You don't have to follow through, but it can help. So just creating people who hold you accountable to your care as well.
Right, yeah, push back on that productivity thing. Like, I did nothing today. Yes, girl. Hey, girl, hey. Right? We need more of that. Like, not to say y'all's work ain't dope. All of y'all's work is dope, but I'm just saying that would help. That would really help. Yes, I love it, Supriya. I love it. Maiya.
So yeah, that thing, letting go of the professionalism and always having to work and this and this and that, letting go of that, it's hard. Still holding on to me, but I'm trying to let go of it. Yeah, it's all triggering all the time. When I first got into my public health training, I realized very quickly, oh, we talking about all the problems in the world. We're talking about all the root causes. We're looking at racism. We're looking at poverty. We're looking at, okay. And then, you know, at the time I was living in San Francisco and just seeing all the poverty and everything that was being reflected back to me, especially the folks who look like me. And I very quickly understood that I cannot live this and work this. I have to find space where I can take a break. I cannot talk about these things. I don't always have to be a social justice warrior all the time. Like you said, Brandon, I don't always have to be telling folks how to act. Like, no, like you have to be able to take a step away. And truth be told, you know, I hinted toward it before, but when, you know, the George Floyd incident happened last year, you know, I was having to teach a health and wellness class, and I was so beside myself. I said, I don't know how, I was so sensitive and tender. I had no idea how I had no idea how to even form words around it. So I didn't. I was like, we're gonna talk about this health and wellness, we're gonna breathe, we're gonna do some yoga. And when I can't have the capacity to do that, which I did eventually, then I stepped in and did that work. I didn't have that for a long time. I didn't want to talk to nobody. Thank you. I don't want to talk. Right? The people around me, they kind of knew. because there was a lot that came up in that. So I do wholeheartedly believe in the power of taking a step back when you need to. We don't always have to be in it doing this fight, especially folks of color. We're always having to do it anyway in one way or another. So we have to be able to take a step back. In terms of my radical self-care, sometimes that step back means, taking a break from the news. And sometimes I have to be like, okay, I see that, I'm gonna get to that, but not today, not on today. Because
not today, Satan.
Not today, not today, exactly. And honestly, too, with that is celebration as well. So I know a lot of folks are feeling, especially since there was a death the same day, and especially since this verdict was a long time coming. We all know that, okay? But I also do believe in the power of celebration, because it is a big deal. Yeah. I remember when Rodney King happened, and I remember all those cops getting off, and so many other cops and so many other bodies, and so let's take that victory. Let's take it as a celebration. It is small and it ain't over, but let's allow ourselves a day at least to say, all right, y'all, we did this.
Yeah.
You know what? With our last election, that was I teach community organizing. That was a huge community effort. What happened in Atlanta, that was a huge community effort. That was us, y'all. What happened last June, that set off the entire world. That wasn't just Minneapolis. That set off Paris, Brazil, Hong Kong. These are victories. Let's let the victories be the victories, even though they're small, because we will get back to it. It's always going to be something to fight, always something that we have to work toward, right? The self-care, I'm on a bunch of group texts where we talk about stupid things and share memes and all kinds of things. I live for them every day. They really keep me afloat and alive. And lastly, I'm a DJ. And so I have not gotten to play a live gig in a very long time. And so I've actually been in a lot of live DJ sets on Twitch and online. And
5 p.m. y'all, DJ Maiya, 5 p.m., don't leave.
I'll be starting crazy though, just kidding. So in the absence of getting to play music, getting able to watch DJs all the time online has just been really my salvation. Now we'll be playing again soon. Fingers crossed. So
thank you. I love it. Thank you. I in closing, we've got a couple of minutes, and first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Maiya, Supriya, and Brandon. And honestly, too, thank you, Alvin, too, for creating a space where something like this could occur. Alvin, I love you. Like, you is one dope dean. And I mean it. I have learned so much, and these spaces it's trickle down effect, and we got to own that. Like, this wouldn't happen without leadership that recognizes that and creates a space for it. So thank you, Alvin. And thank you, panelists. I would want to close with something beautiful and inspirational, but actually my friend JC has invited me to his Spotify list, and there was a song. And for me, radical self-care has been music. And I'm a singer. My family we like the healthy version of the Jackson 5. And we all sing and play, we do something. But so I wanted to go something that actually has been helping me, and that is music, that is singing. Song is also a way that we survive, and throughout generations, we've even passed secrets down through songs, and just so many things song has done for us. And so this is how I want to close. Y'all engage me for the last minute or so. I ain't gonna sing the whole song, just a little bit. But it's by, I think it's Andra Day is her name, or Andra Day. And I don't know the title of the song because I deleted it, but I got the words right here, so I'll just sing it. When the cold bites your bones and gets in your heart, it can make you feel hopeless. And fear will come to steal your sun and make it dark. But don't believe you're lonely. We all had that moment when our shoulders sink and we sit back and think we could just run, but we're not born to chase the fading light. We're not born to fall and lose the fight, never letting go, oh no. And I'm asking you to lift me higher than I've ever been. Hold your breath and say you're gonna come with me, 'cause we were born to follow. Oh. Thank y'all so much. Thank you for coming with me on this journey today. Love y'all so much. That is my alarm. Thank you.
I'm going to say one thing here. I'm not even going to top that. So, but I just want to give my thanks, my love, my gratitude to Sherria, to Maiya, to Supriya, to Brandon, for showing us what's possible today, right? You know, a lot of people talked about this being powerful. A lot of people talked about this being healing. This is 2 hours of healing. This is 2 hours of authenticity, right? People being real with y'all. This is what 2 hours of justice looks like. Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about. You know, to be authentic, to allow ourselves into this room, to allow ourselves to be, that is justice. What is toxic is holding ourselves back, holding who we are, stifling and silencing who we are as people of color, as women, as queer folks, as immigrants. That's the toxicity. So if you wonder if we can actually change this college and make this college better, you don't have any further to look than on this screen, because this is the college. You are it, right? And all we need to do is to find a way to affirm and allow and elevate and advance and encourage people to do exactly what you just saw here today, right? This ain't no mystery, folks. This ain't no mystery, right? And so, you know, people said, can we keep doing this? We have to do this, okay? We have to do this. We have to allow ourselves to be ourselves. That's where the healing comes from. That's where the justice comes from. So I want to thank Sherria, Maiya, Supriya, Brandon for modeling that for us and giving us and them just the space to be. Can we unmic, please, and give them a round of applause?
Yay.
Thank you. Bravo. That was amazing.
Man, I almost forgot we didn't have food. That's just amazing. And I'm Filipino. That's amazing. I mean, to have a party and not have food and let it be good, that's pretty damn good. All right, people, thank you so much. Next time we do this, it's going to be in person. It's going to be with hugs. It's going to be with food. Love y'all. Take care.
Love y'all.
Care. We'll see ya.